Now, to bring the Christopher Morton story to some sort of conclusion and correlate all the information we have in respect of Christopher Morton's statement against Aaron and how it reflects on the investigation and how it shows clearly that people told lies, people were coerced, people got money and green cards to tell lies. And to that end, we're going to go and listen to the Senior Investigating Officer, Mr. Pat Marry, who created a podcast in association with Ian Doyle and Stephen Breen from the Irish Sun. It's called Making a Detective, or Making of a Detective. Now there's 12 episodes to it, covering a number of different crimes. But I would urge people to please listen to the 4 podcasts in relation to the murder and robbery at Lordship Credit Union and the death of Detective Garda Adrian Donoghue. Listen to the podcast from the Senior Investigating Officer. Listen to the absolute disarray and complete mess he and Fort Apache Dundalk made of the investigation, which is quite obvious from the podcast. And I would ask anyone listening to the podcast to bring forward one shred of credible evidence from over 2 hours of a podcast. So if that's possible, we'd be more than happy to interact with anyone. So in relation now specifically to Christopher Morton, the liar and the coward, as we now know, we're going to listen to a couple of little clips of how the interaction took place and how that progressed and how Marry covers for Morton in the course of this podcast known as The Making of a Detective. So just going to listen to one little clip first and then we'll assess it.
To be made over there, and as it turned out, and this is the interesting thing about this, is that there was a newspaper article in the local Argus by a Sinn Féin councillor about the armed robbery, and that anyone with information should come forward and tell the Gardaí. And this particular councillor put it up on his Facebook account, and a friend of his who was living in America contacted him and said, I know Aaron Brady's over here and he told me he shot the guard, and would you get the guards to contact me? And I took up that inquiry and I spoke with the counsellor, and he told me, this is the man in America who's telling me this.
Over a phone call, Pat made contact with the man in America. He told Pat he'd met Aaron Brady in a local bar.
So there we have Senior Investigating Officer Mr. Pat Marry confirming that there was some sort of connection between Christopher Morton and a councillor in the Cooley Peninsula. So that councillor, as we have shown, is Sinn Féin councillor Anton Waters. And allegedly Morton came through Anton Waters. He says a friend of his. So he said a friend of Anton Waters was living in New York. And that friend is Christopher Morton. And we have questioned Anton Waters in relation to his friendship with Morton, but we've had no response or reply, again, as you may have seen in other videos. So that's the initial contact. So now we're going to listen to another little clip from Making of a Detective, and we'll follow the story through to its conclusion.
And I said, would you make a statement? And he wouldn't make a statement. He didn't want to make a statement. I said, that's fine. I understand if you don't want it, and I can understand you may be under fear.
The witness told Pat he didn't fear anyone. If anything, he seemed insulted by the accusation. Having come so close to securing such a vital bit of information, Pat wasn't ready to give up just yet.
And I was trying to get across to him that what he was telling me was very important and vital in the progress in the investigation, and I would like him to come forward and make that statement. And I'm not going to lie to you, I said, you'll need to go to court, you'll need to stand up and say what you say in your statement. And he says, I'll talk to you, he says, next couple of days. And I says, fair enough.
Pat was...
So there we have the initial contact, as it would appear, between Pat Marry and Christopher Morton. And I think this is a very important part of the podcast, and it's a very important part of how we put Aaron's campaign across, because it would be right and proper and 100% correct, and it would be the right thing to do morally and on all sorts of levels for Christopher Morton to go and give the information to Garda Síochána, to Pat Marry or whomever in the incident room in Fort Apache in Dundalk. Now, the only problem we have with that is if Christopher Morton was telling the truth. We now know Christopher Morton 100%, 1,000,000% told a tissue of lies in his statement to gain financial gain, green cards, and to protect his life in New York. So we'll continue now with Morton's story and his interactions with Pat Marry.
I tried to ring him, his phone was off. I said, that's that now, this, you know.
That was, until he got a phone call from an unknown American number. The man was keen to talk and apologised for leaving Pat waiting.
I got a phone call then from him on a different number, and he says, I'm sorry. I said, grand, not a bother. But he says, I did make up my mind, I will make a statement. And I said, are you sure? He said, yes. There's one difficulty, but he says, I ran it through two very good friends of mine, people I would trust, and one of them told me, make your statement and stand up and be counted. And the other one told me, don't have anything got to do with the guards, keep your mouth shut, you know nothing. And that was, he says, but I think I've thought it out myself, and I think about Adrian Dunn, his wife, and in particular his two children. And that's why I want to make a statement.
So there we have another little information. I know there were some difficulties in the initial contact. There was a breakdown in communications, and then Morton came back to Pat Marry and made that contact. And Marry goes on to try and expand on this story and make Morton seem as some sort of a hero, which he is far from. He's a liar and a coward. That's what Christopher Morton is. But Morton says he discussed it with two other people. Now, this is very, very vital to understand. Christopher Morton allegedly got this would be enormous piece of information in respect of someone like Christopher Morton, who I have said lives only 7 or 8 miles away from us, or did when he lived in Mike, 7 or 8 miles away from us where I'm sitting now. Lives 7 or 8 miles from the murder scene. And Christopher Morton wants us to believe that the alleged murderer allegedly told him this great piece of information in a bar in New York. I don't care who you are or what you are. Chris, you would have to tell your partner, your wife or your girlfriend, whoever it was at the time, Mr. Morton. We'll iron that out when the time is right. Brothers, cousins, close family circle, close friends and associates and work colleagues. You never mentioned it to one. And this bullshit about you spoke to 2 people. Now, I'm assuming one of those 2 people is your cousin Anthony Maguire, whom you organised and helped coerce to also give a statement. But we'll be covering Anthony's story in later videos. We have done it before, and many of Aaron's campaign followers will be aware of Anthony Maguire, drugs, ammunition, large amounts of cash and all that sort of thing, and his eligibility in New York. And so this point that you never told anyone, I must reiterate how unbelievable and how totally impossible that would be. So you're living in New York, someone tells you about a very serious incident that happened close to you at home, and you don't mention it to anyone. You're a fucking liar, Morton, and you made up a story to save your own life in America and get financial gain, and also not be thrown out of America because your status was totally illegal, no matter what type of marriage you have. And again, that's something we'll cover in later videos. So that's that just little snippet of how Marry, along with Stephen Breen and Ian Doyle, tried to protect and create some sort of a hero aspect for Morton. Something similar to what Schiller done for Daniel Cahill. And they're trying to turn a sow's ear into a silk purse. And would get away with it, only we have Aaron's campaign here to call them out on what is absolutely disgusting and despicable behaviour. And to top it all off, we're just going to listen to the last little bit of complete and utter lies by Senior Investigating Officer Pat Murray. Now, he's either totally stupid, incompetent and not fit for purpose, as any member of an Garda Síochána. He wouldn't be fit for foot patrol, or else he is telling a complete tissue of lies. And we listen to this little clip and then we'll explain why.
So he said, if you come over on the 15th of that month, whatever it was, 15th of September, October, whatever it was, he says, I'll meet you in New York.
They arranged to meet on 10th and 24th Street in Chelsea Village, a busy, upmarket part of Manhattan.
And he says, I'll meet you at the corner there at such a time. And I said, fair enough. And I was delighted with that. I said, I thought I had... Now, I had this person, I knew who he was, and I had him well vetted and checked out. You always have a fear that you're being set up, that they have a plant in there to tell you lies or to put you off the investigation or to, you know. But I had this person well checked out, and I was quite happy with his bona fides and that he was who he was. And he told me the truth, and he was legitimate in New York, and he wasn't a person looking for anything from the guards or looking for anything from Homeland Security or anything of that nature, that there'd be no compromise in any way.
Pat asked him to relay what had happened.
That there is 1 minute of audio from Senior Investigating Officer Mr. Pat Murray. Every time I hear it, and I've had to listen to it on a few occasions, makes my stomach sick and it turns my stomach. And it makes us very, very angry. And it should have the same effect on any right-thinking Irish citizen. Because that minute that man is after speaking for is a complete and utter disgrace. So always checked, always well vetted and checked out. In case he was being set up, he was well checked out. Any check-up with the PSNI in respect of Christopher Morton would have led to criminal activity and an illegal immigrant in New York. And his background and who he had wronged here in Northern Ireland, why he left Northern Ireland and how he was, let's say, asked to leave Northern Ireland would have been easily checked out. Now, you also skirted round Morton's friend who was also going to give testimony. And again, Anthony Maguire, his cousin, caught with drugs, £30,000 worth of cocaine, £30,000 worth of cash, and you had them checked out, and you still dealt with these fucking scumbags. To tell lies, Pat Murray, because you made a complete and utter mess out of the investigation from January till April or May 2013. And you left a trail of destruction after you in Fort Apache incident room in Dundalk. You are happy with his bona fides. You must be absolutely joking. Now, I have called you out on this on a number of times, Pat Murray. I have called Morton out on it a number of times. And I think after 3 years, if we were saying anything that was incorrect about either of you two layers, Morton and Murray, we'd have been drawn over the coals. We'd have been pulled on it by now. And this is the simple fact. This 1 minute of audio from Pat Murray explains 100% how this investigation was carried out. And this behaviour by Murray is exactly why none of his colleagues or the prosecution wanted to see a bit of him up in the courtroom. Because he's a complete and utter liability. And they've banned them now from the airwaves and any media work now whatsoever. I think they've pulled the plug on all Mary stuff. He was who he was, said he was. Of course, yeah. So that means you knew exactly who he was, you knew exactly where he came from, you knew exactly what he had done, you knew exactly Pat Murray. All the paperwork was in the Community for Restorative Justice in Newry. Quite easy to find, it's quite easy to get. It's on public record. So you knew all about Morton and his cousin Anthony Maguire. He was legitimate in New York. He most certainly was not legitimate in New York because he told the tissue of lies on his ESTA to get into New York. Of course he did. He had a criminal record here in Ireland. And also, Matt Katsky, or mate Matt Katsky, could quite easily have, let's say, investigated Morton's marital status and his applications for his green cards in respect of that. So he was legitimate in New York, highly questionable. In fact, I say that is incorrect. He wasn't a person looking for anything from the Guards or Homeland Security. There was no compromise in any way. You are a complete and utter liar, Pat Murray. And you are a disgrace to everyone involved in this case. And I have to say, you are a disgrace to your colleague who lost his life during the course of duty. Because what you have done in that 1 minute of audio explains, it's better than a million videos we could do if the people of Ireland knew exactly the extent of the lies you told there in association with Christopher Morton, the liar, whom we know told a tissue of lies. And even for any detective to believe a story and a statement from a man that was drinking for probably 30 out of the previous 48 hours, met a man in a dark, dingy pub in New York and had a 3 or 4 line conversation with him. Absolute nonsense. Even to consider to bring it as evidence. Notwithstanding the fact that Morton was telling a tissue of lies and Aaron Brady was not even in the tombstone that night. So that 1 minute of audio from Mary is exactly how this case was handled and how it was investigated. Absolutely disgusting. And it makes us sick to the stomach. I have to listen to them podcasts to take the clip, and it is absolutely sickening. So I'd ask everyone, please, the making of a detective, please listen to the 4 podcasts. See if there's any credible information or evidence mentioned or spoken about. And if you see something there, I promise you, if you bring any words that Pat Murray or Stephen Breen speaks in that podcast, we'll be able to contradict it and show physical evidence or show where there is evidence on public record to contradict anything that is said in that podcast.